Good afternoon. On my way home. Another day is done. Didn't have to go out in the cold today. I actually refused to go out in the cold today. So that's a good thing. I'm hoping this video doesn't include the weird clicking artifacts in the sound that the last one did. I wanted to talk today about my ghost experiences. So, the existence of ghosts, I think, is a very polarized subject. I know a lot of people who swear that ghosts exist, and I know a lot of people who swear that ghosts don't exist, that it's poppycock. I remember going to this historic house up in northeast Baltimore and getting a tour of the house. I wish I could remember. Ledoux. It was Ledoux Gardens, and this guy named Ledoux was very eccentric. He had a lot of famous people that came to visit him, and we took a tour of his property, the inside, the floors, and I asked the docent if the house was haunted, and he looked at me like I was a fucking idiot, and he said, "Ghosts are nothing but poppycock." I was like, okay, you just insulted me, so I'm gonna go now without causing a scene, but you're a fucking asshole. Didn't say that, but that's what he was. But yeah, I mean, I fully believe that people who completely disbelieve in ghosts have never truly had an experience with the supernatural, with that kind of supernatural phenomenon. And if you experience it enough, if you experience things that cannot be explained, you therefore have to assume that there are things that exist outside of scientific explanation. And since the scientific community is constantly growing and the scientific findings are constantly being adjusted, I don't put my faith in the fact that since scientists say it doesn't exist, it therefore doesn't exist. For example, in the 70s, if I went into a public forum and said that the moons of Saturn, and damn it, I can't remember which moon it was. Wasn't Titan, but one of the moons of Saturn has water on it, and that the surface is nothing but a crust of ice. And since that moon has water, it probably has life. They would have laughed at you. You would have been ridiculed. But today, since they have discovered that actually moon has water underneath its surface, things have changed. Just like now, the scientific community will laugh at you when you say that ghosts exist. And since they have no evidence to prove otherwise, they can turn the noses up at you and say, "Ha, we have no proof, therefore you are wrong." Anyway, in 2004, I had a house built in the western countryside of Maryland. We were living in an urban environment. My kids were very young. I wanted them to grow up in a non-urban environment, so I moved them out to the country. So I had a house built on an acre. This house was built in a small town called New Windsor, which has a lot of history, especially when it concerns the Civil War. The town was used pretty much as a medical evacuation spot for troops from Gettysburg. So there were a lot of deaths that occurred in that town area. And to this day, I think that entire town and its surrounding acreage is extremely haunted. So I had this house built, and while it was being built, I would visit it, see how progress was coming along. And I remember I brought my family, my parents, with me to go look at the house, and it was just studded out. There was no drywall. You could just walk through the walls and get into the interior of the house. But it was 2 stories, and we walked into the garage and went into what was supposed to be the kitchen. And we were sitting there talking, and I heard boot steps clunking above my head on the second floor, walking from room to room. And I looked at my dad, and he looked at me, and he said, is anybody supposed to be here? And I said, no, it was the weekend. There's nobody that was supposed to be on the property or in the house. So we went upstairs and there was nobody there. The house wasn't even built yet, and there was already signs of something going on. And that should have gave me a clue. So the house was finished and we moved into it, and for a while, I want to say a year, nothing really happened. But gradually things started to, I want to say, ramp up. For instance, there was a shadow person. I know you're going to roll your eyes or laugh, but there was a life-sized thing that resembled a man, and you could not make any detail out. You could just make out his shape. That was seen by my kids, by myself, by my wife, all on separate occasions, and by our neighbor. So what really, the first thing that I remember happening wasn't to me, it was to my kids. They were awake on a Saturday morning while Holly and I slept in, and they were playing outside my bedroom door in the second floor landing. And the second floor landing had a balcony and a railing where you could look down onto the entranceway of the first floor. It was a very open floor plan. And they were sitting there playing, and they both witnessed, they both verified this story, that this shadow man walked through my bedroom door, walked through them playing, in between them, and walked into what was across the hall into my office. And they literally recall telling me that they were looking up at this thing that walked past them and followed it, and it went through two doors. So that was the first thing that gave me a clue that something was going on besides those footsteps. But it was really quiet up until that point, and I didn't think my house was haunted. And after that, I kind of blew it off. But what happened maybe another year later was that my youngest daughter got older, and she moved into the office, into her own room, and Shelby stayed in the room that they had shared. And she came running into our bedroom one evening. It was probably about 11 p.m. She had already been put into bed, and she was on the top bunk of a bunk bed, and she heard the door open to her bedroom, and the door opened, and she heard someone walking on the floor. You know, this feet make a distinctive sound when you are walking on carpet. She heard someone walking across the room toward her bunk bed. And at this point, she covered her head up in the covers because she was terrified. But the thing that got her was that the bunk bed shook with someone climbing into the bottom bunk. So she thought maybe it might have been Sophia, the younger daughter, her younger sister. So she uncovered her head and she looked underneath, and there was nobody there. At which point she jumped off her bed, ran into my room, hysterical. So that evening, the next evening, I decided to buy a digital recorder, just a voice recorder, a little handheld digital voice recorder. And I said, I'm just going to leave this thing on at night when I go to bed, and the next day, during the next days, I will just listen to that recording as I work, because I sit at a desk all day and I write code. So listening to nothing but room tone, you'll be able to, my thinking was I'd be able to pick out anything, you know, if someone talked or if someone made a noise, or so that was the beginning of a long series of recordings and capturing voices and capturing noises. And I remember the first night I did that, I did it in my bedroom first, And I picked up this voice, and it happened like 10 minutes after I went to bed. It was just me and my wife in my room, and it was this female higher pitched voice that spoke what I'm trying, in a language that I don't know what it is. I want to say it's Native American. It was, it basically said, I'll never forget what it said. It basically said, Ichi amma, That's what it said. And that just blew me away. I'm like, what the hell? So I just kept recording every night and picking things up. There was a child that was in that house that was not my daughter's. For instance, there were wooden stairs that went from the main level to the basement, and I would pick up on these recordings on some night, somebody running up and down those stairs. It was unmistakable because I know what those stairs sound like after you live in the house for a while. I picked up on another recording a little girl saying hello, and on another occasion that actually woke me up. I was dead asleep, and I just kind of woke up, and in the echo of my mind, I'm like, somebody just said hello. I mean, I woke up, I was like, did someone just say hello? I heard it with my own ears. It woke me up, but I also caught it on digital. The covers in me and my wife's bedroom when we used to sleep, Holly verified this too. I would say, Holly, do you feel somebody tugging on the comforter? You could feel the comforter slowly moving. I mean, slowly moving down, like someone was pulling it off of you. And she would say, yeah, I feel that. So I would pull it back. I used to get woken up by the covers hitting my face. I remember just like, what the hell just hit me in the face? I'm guessing it was just the covers. So much stuff happened at that house, and it happened before that house was even built. So, I mean, there's this theory of active and residual hauntings, where it's just like a tape recorder, a videotape being played over and over again. People walking through walls because the wall was placed there now, but there didn't used to be, so their spirit energy is like moving through, just replaying that scene back whenever it was recorded. But on the second floor of a house that was only built in 2004, how can that be residual energy? There was no house there before. It was farmland. I knew the people who owned the house, who owned that property beforehand. There was nothing there. So how could residual energy be on the second floor of a house that never existed? It's just strange. Going 13 minutes now. I'll tell you one last story about that shadow man. One evening, it was dusk, and I was parked in my car facing the house, the garage. We had this property the whole property sloped up, and I remember sitting there doing something in my car before I went back into the house, and movement caught my eye over there, and I looked up, and I saw a man running through my property up the hill, and he was completely black, and that was my first impression. Second impression was that I couldn't see his feet moving. He really didn't have feet, so he was kind of like floating up the hill. And the third was that he was on fire, but the fire was black, the same color as him. So as he moved up the hill, he had this stuff peeling off of him, like if somebody who was on fire was running. That's what you could see peeling off of him. And I watched him go up until he hit this tree and went behind this tree, and he never emerged on the other side of the tree. That was weird. Anyway, it's been 15 minutes. I've bored you long enough. Kind of scattered. Holly has her own stories. The girls have their own stories. A lot of stuff happened in that house. Anyway, you guys take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Stopping so I don't hit the back of this car. And I'll catch you in the next one.